Morning. Well, this is Dan Markel. He's the victim in this case. A son, a brother, a colleague, a mentor, a professor, a friend, but most of all, a father, an Abba, a dad. A dedicated and loving father whose downfall was brought about by the fact that his number one priority was maximizing his time with those little boys in the wake of a bitter divorce from their mother. Defense called witnesses to come in here and give you an expert opinion that his divorce and the subsequent litigation was not contentious. Not contentious to whom? It was contentious to Dan Markel. It was contentious to Wendi Adelson. And it was contentious to this defendant. And then after telling you what a great guy Dan Markel was in opening statements, they called witnesses to tell you what a pain in the butt he was. And he was a pain in the butt to those people, those awful lawyers that can't even admit that divorces are emotionally charged. He was a pain in their butts. He was a pain in Wendy's butt, and he was a pain in Donna's butt. Why? Because this was his life we were talking about. Dan Markel was not a file on some lawyer's desk. He was a real person who cared passionately about every scrap of paper in that divorce file. He wasn't some bumbling idiot. He was a Harvard-educated law professor. And yeah, he was making it as difficult as possible for this defendant to get her non-negotiable, which just also happened to be Dan Markel's non-negotiable, those two little boys. You have learned about this conspiracy and how it has unraveled over the last 11 years since Dan Markel's death. The defendants in this case have all attempted to point fingers at each other. They have argued that the state's theory is right. It's right, you got it right, with everybody except for me. I didn't do it. Garcia's defense was that Charlie went directly to Rivera to arrange the hit on Dan Markel. Katherine Magbanua testified in her trial and said she had no knowledge of this murder. Charlie must have gone around her directly to Garcia. In Charlie's trial, he said Magbanua, Garcia, and Rivera all got together to kill Dan Markel without any direction from any Adelson family member. Each defendant characterized himself or herself as another victim in this case. A victim in this situation, a victim of their co-defendants, setting them up, or the appearance of evidence that seemed to implicate them but wasn't what it appeared to be. But despite their efforts to insulate themselves and to distance themselves from their co-conspirators, they made enough mistakes to get themselves caught and held accountable for their respective roles in this conspiracy. And today is Donna Adelson's turn. Despite their efforts to play victims, Dan Markel is still the only victim in this case. And the only thing he was guilty of was fighting like hell for those little boys. And he lost. He lost everything. This is what he looked like before this defendant conspired to hire a hitman to have him killed, and this is what he looked like after. The evidence has shown that on July 18th, 2014, this brilliant, accomplished, beloved man was gunned down in cold blood in his own garage. And this horrific death ultimately set the police down two separate paths, following the two most promising leads that they had. The first lead was to chase down that Prius that, thank God, Mr. Geiger caught a glimpse of pulling out of the driveway that morning. And the second path was to ask, as we would with any murder investigation, who had a motive to want him dead. And within 1 hour of the shooting, well before Professor Markel had even been pronounced dead, this path was already pointing to the defendant when Wendi Adelson revealed to officers that her parents had more reason to dislike her ex than anyone else. And what offense had Mr. Markel committed against Donna Adelson and her family, refusing to let his children be taken away from him? Objecting to her telling his kids that he's stupid? The evidence has shown that Donna Adelson was all about psychological warfare, and when all else failed, she was willing to do whatever it took to accomplish her non-negotiable, to get a win. In order for you to render a verdict of guilty, the state must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that these crimes were committed and that this defendant is the person who committed the crimes, or in this case, one of the persons who committed the crimes. It is undisputed that these crimes were committed. This was a first-degree murder. No doubt about that. But who did it? The only issue left is identification, or what we call ID. The defense told you in openings, motive doesn't really matter. Don't pay attention to all the motive. Don't pay attention to all the emails. But motive can be compelling proof of who done it. Identification. And thus, critical to your determination of the defendant as one of the persons that committed this crime. Despite some of the testimony that you heard, it is clear that the divorce between Wendi and Dan was contentious. Except the person who cared most about Wendi's divorce and relocation specifically wasn't Wendi. It was her mother. Charlie Adelson solicited Katherine Magbanua to kill Dan Markel, but why? Who solicited Charlie? Because Charlie didn't care about the Adelson family getting a win against Dan Markel. He didn't care about relocation. He didn't care about Wendi's divorce. He cared about go-karts and jet skis and pretty girls. But he also cared about getting things done for the number one woman in his life, and that was his mother. She managed Charlie's life for him, and in return, he solved problems for her. That pattern is seen throughout this case. He talks to Wendi on the defendant's behalf to get her to pull the plug on the Tallahassee house, to date Dave and invite him to Mother's Day, to pursue a medical malpractice job, even though that's not even her area of the law. And on and on and on. She micromanaged Wendi's life. Charlie knows how to manage Wendi in a way that Donna can't, or knows how to talk to her in a way that Donna can't. And Wendi needs their help, right? Because according to them, she doesn't even have enough of a brain in her head to run her own life without their help. Donna decides what's best for everyone, and if she runs into any problems making that happen, Charlie is her go-to guy to get it done. He is the problem solver. And what was the biggest problem that Donna Adelson had in 2014? Dan Markel. Wendi filed her petition for divorce on September 10th of 2012, and the defendant was right in the middle of it. In the fall of 2012, the defendant told her son, Rob Adelson, that she had been in Tallahassee for several months, renting a new place for Wendi. She used her own maiden name to do that, to disguise the identity of who was renting